Okay, so thank you all for coming back to the stage, and I know there's still people coming. And thank you so much for enjoying the lunch and networking. There'll be much more about that later on. This is one of my favorite panels because I work a lot myself with the global supply chain. And with me, I have my weatherman, Anders Rodenberg, who is going to give some data. So it's not just going to be a talk, but it's going to be data, fact, and basic. Then we have Talent that I just had the pleasure to meet. She's the vice president at MasterCard and is a true passion. And she said to me today, and I want to go everywhere where female quotient goes. So that's what you're going to do. Then I have Iris van der Wagen that I should have met for many years ago, but I just met at Climate Week, and I'm the type of person when I see something who's a mover and shaker, I kind of bring them on board. I kind of stalk them until they say yes, and then, or maybe they do, but she gave up and she came, and she realized she actually knows a lot of people here because she's on the same mission. She's the executive director for Watson Jera Institute in 2030. And then I have Cameron Soul, the CEO of Bottle Shop and Together Bains. And I have Leon Peters, did I say that right? Yes. So sorry if I didn't. Global Climate Industry Leader at Deloitte Sustainability at Deloitte. And I will say Deloitte is one of the leading consultant companies in the world really to drive, you do it yourself as a company, but you also lead the way for many, many amazing companies. So first I would like to start, and I would actually love to start with you, Cameron, because you have been on this mission, and not just about selling cool things, but you're all about where it's produced, how it's produced, what is happening with what was produced, and so on and so forth. Before anybody, I would like to say that before anybody in this space even thought about the global goals, just to make clear, right? He's one of the old guys, old people in this whole space.
Thanks, Anne. Thanks, Anne, for making me feel really, really ancient. But it's so lovely to be with you all here today. And I think when we walk into a beautiful retail space and we're captivated by the sparkle and the execution, that's very much what's happening at the front of the stage. But it's really the bit that excites me most, and from a social and environmental perspective matters most, is what's going on backstage. What's going on with the supply chains, and how are those engineered, and how can we engineer supply chains to really deliver positive social and environmental impact. And I think for too many years we've lived in a world where we've been happy to be excited by the glitz and the glamour and the sparkle and the execution, but actually we all now need to get collectively excited about getting supply chains right to make sure that we can drive serious social and environmental impact. And I think obviously we're all here in the FQ Lounge because we all appreciate the fundamental importance of women being supported and empowered economically and financially, particularly as we deal with the poly crisis and the impacts to our global economy that are happening on multiple fronts. We've seen and witnessed how fragile we all are through the impacts of the pandemic. We're already seeing, obviously, the impacts of climate. So from my perspective, how can we couple the backstage of what goes on through our voracious appetite as human beings to consume with driving net positive impact on the ground, socially and environmentally, within the most vulnerable communities to climate change and to the huge crises that we face, be that food, be that potential pandemics, and so on. So I think for me that we've been very fortunate, we've been privileged, if you like, over our 21-year journey with Bottle Top and more recently our global Together Band advocacy campaign, to see and feel how fashion can be a force for good, how through our ateliers that we have in the Amazon rainforest, in Nepal, in Kenya, and in the favelas in the northeast of Brazil, in Salvador, how fashion can be a transformational force for good for women in their communities, within their families, and how that by underpinning economically the work that those women do as talented craftspeople, but just to make the point that we don't go looking for factories to produce our designs. We go to communities where there is the economic need and where through our slow fashion processes we create the opportunity economically for those communities. We've seen how that approach to supply chain management can deliver pride, self-confidence, joy and love within the family structure, and the resilience that is so critical as we face forward into the climate crisis and the intersecting crises that we face. So that's kind of a bit of an overview about our sort of approach to supply chains.
So just to be a little bit concrete, this you have on here, right? What is this? Where it is produced? What is the supply chain?
Thank you, Anne, for bringing it back to actually what matters. So the product, the star of the show, and I invite all of you to step over to our little bottle top together band pop up behind you. But is where, so what I'm wearing here is a crossbody bag that's made from hundreds of recycled aluminium ring pulls that are collected by homeless guys from across and around the region of Salvador in the northeast of Brazil. So they go around collecting them, they bring them to our atelier, where we pay them per kilo for the waste raw material of the ring pulls that they've collected. The women at the studio then go through and it first selects the ones that are in good enough condition to be used. About 30% are too damaged to be used. They're then washed. They then clip the piece that was attached to the can. They file that down individually. They polish them. Then these ones, it's looking very pristine and black. And that's because we've sent these ones to a laboratory to be anodized, where we've transformed the outer coating of the metal to the specific color. Then they've gone back to the atelier. Then they've been woven. So it's really a wearable work of art. But we love to play with waste materials in many different forms. And the Together bands, which are a more accessible iteration of what we do on a supply chain and materials level, we combine different materials like confiscated illegal firearm metal, food waste, ocean plastic, and many other novel regenerative and waste materials.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anne.
Okay, Iris, you literally live and breathe the supply chain, and you are working with some of the biggest brains in the world. And I want you to be, not because I didn't think you were concrete, but it's good to be concrete. I want you to be detailed. You were just announcing a huge framework to get together with United Nations Women. I mean, what is this mission about? Concrete example. And I would also like you to talk a little bit about, I mean, Cameron is leading, there's no doubt about that. But where are we with the brains that you represent? Okay.
Well, first of all, a very good afternoon, and I'm really delighted to be here in the Equality Lounge. As we are 300 years behind, I think we all need to act more. And so allow me also to introduce the Watch and Jew Initiative 2030. It's a very young initiative. It's a bit disruptive, which I love. It was founded by Cartier and the Caring Group. Actually, two CEOs came together and said, we need to do more and we need to go deeper into certain topics that we deeply care about for the global jewelry and watch industry. And so the WGI 2030 was born. We are focusing on 3 key topics that you cannot actually disconnect because they're all interconnected. Everything around climate resilience. Second, everything about preserving resources, so nature and biodiversity. And the third one is everything on inclusiveness. So I'm going to focus on inclusiveness, but we can't disconnect it from the others. So where are we now? And I think it's important to give a concrete example. Actually, when we looked at the element of supply chain, we collaborated with UN Women. And UN Women is just in the development of what they call a gender-responsive procurement tool. And they asked us, Iris, do you want to test this tool? So before we really are going to scale it up, let's do it. And I said, yes, let me try to find a number of brands that want to go deeper into the supply chain and understand actually, are they buying from women entrepreneurs? Are they buying from companies that are embracing gender? And then if we go to a next step, D&I. But let me tell you, this is about gender. And I'm happy to share maybe in the next question something more on D&I, what we did with the initiative. So just to give you an idea, we had 9 brands participating, Cartier, Gucci, Monica Vinader, Swarovski, and also some companies in the middle of the supply chain in manufacturing, such as Rosy Blue, Rebel Ménager, and Julie Sandla of Vietnam, because I want to recognize these companies because it was quite brave to do this. So first of all, what was some of the results that we saw? We saw that much more work is needed to put gender-responsive procurement at the core of their business strategy. I mean, that was a conclusion. So we see that companies often, they sign the woman empowerment principles, and everyone in this room should sign the woman empowerment principles. Don't reinvent the wheel. It's a great framework to commit to gender equality. But when they had to go deeper into the supply chain, they did not have so much information on their supply chain. Second, while all the participating companies had supplier databases with a lot of data, not all captured the supplier data categorized by the company's owner's gender or gender responsiveness. So it means actually there are no frameworks behind supply chain to really understand what's going on the gender topic. And most companies had set annual targets for procurement, spent with women-owned or gender-responsive companies, so that's the good news. But when you look at the tracking of the progress, it becomes a bit more complicated. So what was some of the advice that we're doing? Because this was in phase 1, we're now going to phase 2. We actually are asking companies and CEOs to look at standalone gender-responsive procurement policies. It's really important that people are trained and understand what it means to buy, and also to have that supplier diversification, because it's quite strange, right? We have all this diversity in consumers. Why is that not reflected in markets and indeed in the analysis of your supply chain? Second of all, let's proactively recruit women for the procurement roles, and also not just about women, but look at more diversification in that leadership role. Then also include much more targets into the functions and responsibilities, and then have a monitoring process into place. And then finally set smart targets, I think. And again, I think what is also key, and that's what we're working on with the Global Compact, is how can we get the suppliers as an extended part of your network? Suppliers are partners. Suppliers are not standalone. They're part of your family. They're part of your risk management. They're part of your capacity building. So how can you bring them into the journey of education? And we're very proud, and I hope we can work with you on this topic, is in January we're launching with the Global Compact, and Sandor Gambo is here, at the COP28, a really accountability mechanism. So first of all, we're getting suppliers to be trained on the key topics, and second, we're building ourselves what we call the accountability mechanism, so that we can help companies report on progress, not standalone, but within new consumer expectations and stakeholder expectations, and also the evolving regulatory landscape. So this is a nutshell, but happy to have offline conversations, happy to share what we're doing, and indeed, there's no time to waste. Thank you again.
Thank you. I think that was a clear call for action and invitation for collaboration. I'm going to jump a little bit also to Anders, because Anders, he really sit with the data, and I think that's a nice thing for you to take over. So, share.
No, but I think you are basically highlighting all the right things here. There is so much potential, and especially when you get it into the consumers, and they need to be aware that it really does matter if you buy certain products from one company or another, depending on how they treat their supply chain. And this is where your vote as a consumer really has an effect. One of the problems you're also highlighting is the data and the data availability. We're doing a lot of work, as many of you know, around diversity, equity, and inclusion, gender being one of the most important of those pillars, but getting that into scope 3 of company supply chain, doing it with great companies like MasterCard as well, and MasterCard is even also taking that further with technologies and solutions for especially consumer businesses that wants to understand their scope 3 DEI impact and understanding how much good or bad are they doing, but not only in the supply chain of, you could say, the women-owned businesses, the race, ethnicity, minority-owned businesses, people with disabilities, because that is something that is super important. But in most companies, 80% of their spend are with other large companies that never qualifies via the ownership. So where companies have the most purchasing power and where they can really create change, they can't use those certificates. So maybe one example here very quickly on what companies are doing right now in this space. We can have a look at and you then can't see it, but we can talk about it afterwards. But essentially it is where companies are taking their whole supply chain, and instead of understanding their emission scope, they're then understanding what is the impact from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective. So here we're looking at a company, it's anonymized, but essentially their suppliers in North America is doing 11% better than the other suppliers they could have used for a certain product category. It also looks good in Europe. In Asia, it's still positive. In Oceania, it's positive, but in South America, they're actually using suppliers that they could have chosen other suppliers that are performing much better on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you can do this either on total, or you can do it on gender or on race, ethnicity. This company specifically had a big problem around race, ethnicity. They were actually good on gender, but not on race, ethnicity. But this is where they then are able to go in and look how much is our positive and negative impact on these different categories, and they can come up with a net impact across, again, total DI or gender or race, ethnicity, and this is really what companies like MasterCard and others are doing, so that you could start seeing supplier by supplier which ones are affecting positively in your supply chain and which ones should you be doing more with, which are the real bad ones that are way below the benchmarks, and how much are you spending with them. And this is where those type of suppliers, you can do two things. Either you engage with them, help them, educate them to improve, or you get them out of your supply chain and do more business with existing suppliers that are already doing a great job, or again, you source new suppliers that are doing great in this space. So again, there are many options, but it's you have to attack this both from the smaller, but also in the larger end.
Thank you so much, Anders. It's good to get the data so we know exactly what we're talking about. So with this, I would love to hear from you, Talat. I just recently got to know you and all the great work you're doing at MasterCard. So let me hear what are you guys doing around the whole supply chain and how?
Sure.
Yeah.
So for those of you who don't know me, it's Talat Qureshi from MasterCard. I actually look after this region. So delighted COP is here in Dubai. So interesting, and thank you for the invitation. MasterCard were the first in the payment industry to declare to be zero carbon emission by 2040. That's the first, yeah? But it goes beyond that. You said quite rightly, is it about suppliers? How do we do this? How do we actually monitor? How do we look at the data? But MasterCard is a technology company, and it sits in the middle of the payments ecosystem, which is a very unique proposition we have. We are actually looking at buyers and suppliers. So those corporates and who are supply chain actually sit on both sides of the spectrum. So what can we do at MasterCard? So I'm going to talk to you about what we do internally as an organization, to your point about the monitoring and how well. So every single person at MasterCard in their scorecard actually has an ESG target. So if we as an organization don't perform, we all suffer. So what does that translate into real words, yeah? Because there's so many functions within every corporation. Some of us come from the corporate world. It boils down to simple things, what you said, Cameron. Who are the suppliers we're actually working with, yeah? Do they have ways of reporting back about their carbonization? If they're not, we are going to ask for that. And you're right, it's the big players who have right to say that. If we don't change, it doesn't go down the food system. It really doesn't, yeah? You talk about monitoring, Iris. I know from my team's perspective, we've looked at different things, lots of initiatives, and I'll give you an example from the Dubai office. So those of you who are from Dubai, you all love Deliveroo, you love Uber Eats. I'm from the UK, and this was something I really learnt about. So they looked at facilities of how many packages were coming at lunchtime, how many little Uber drivers were coming in and dropping it. They actually said, if we actually had in-house catering done for you guys, would you stop that to help the carbon footprint, the waste, the plastic, everything else? And it was a resounding success. Small measure, very small, but real, yeah? And that's happening as I speak now. The second thing we've actually introduced in some parts of the world, especially in the UK, is bicycles. We looked at commuting. How do you commute to your office, and what can be better? And I mean, for those of you from London, you'll know we had the bikes there and all the rest of it. They're actually looking at how we partner with that. So those are just small measures that we can take as an organization. MasterCard are committed to this. Our CEO has actually declared it as part of his vision. Goes back to leadership commitment. If the leadership don't say it, the next rung don't say it, and it continues down. But more importantly, Cameron, you mentioned something so important to my heart, is what is the supply chain? How do we actually influence our customers, who are the FIs and non-FIs? And we rely on our partnership here to actually help us educate them on who they're actually doing business with. Because it's back to education, it's back to training, understanding why they have to do this. It's not lip service. And I'm really proud to say the partnership we have has gone. We're the first also to introduce the carbon calculator for our consumer customers, and we're now launching it in the corporate world, which is even more powerful. So for us, from two perspectives, what MasterCard does and what MasterCard are doing for our clients and our customers.
And I just want to say, with also based in the background I come from, I'm like Cameron, one of the old one in the whole impact world. I love companies with a big brain taking really the stand, because when they take the stand, there's peer-to-peer pressure, and then everything is moving. So thank you so much, MasterCard, for doing this. I mean, this is what we need. I have a shipping background. When Maersk stepped up, we know it with SBC that you also work with on us. They stepped up. We need those brains to step up, and then you move the entire industry.
And I'll tell you one thing, Anne, which 2015 we started what we call Priceless Planet, and this is actually for the carbon footprint to actually plant a tree. We have made a commitment at MasterCard to get 50 million trees by 2025. That's a huge number. We're nearly around the corner. Again, another example, MasterCard are not just lip service, we're actually delivering, yeah? And delighted to be part of our organization.
Thank you so much. So Deloitte is one of those, are you probably one of the biggest consultant companies in the world?
We are the largest
You are
advisory
the largest,
company.
just to make that clear, yes. You are doing some amazing work, with I can only say, coming from that industry, is that it's very important, because you literally sit at so many tables around the world, and with your service are giving guidance. So tell me about how you, as Deloitte, but also how you work with this, because it's, you could say, to have this huge organization that you have, to have every single person that sit at those tables around the world at big corporations, how do you get them all to move in that direction and be educated and talking the walk and so on?
That's a very good question. With the introduction, you didn't tell that I started my career as a supply chain consultant. So for almost 20 years, I was advising clients really in supply chain. So I would say that gives me also a bit of the right to speak today. And I still think in supply chain language. So I always think about supply and demand. And if you look to the supply side, out of the Deloitte research, amazing statistics came out of how you diversify, I would say, your own company as well the ecosystem that you're working in. So an ecosystem could be, you are working together with your suppliers that are supplying raw materials or other things. And we see that organizations and ecosystems with inclusive cultures and behaviors are 6 times more innovative. They are 8 times as likely to achieve better business results and 2 times as likely to meet or exceed financial targets. So it's really opening up the eyes from the procurement departments and the manufacturing departments to say, okay, don't focus only on in time in full, because that was 20 years ago, I would say, the line in supply chain, and don't look only to the economic equation, because other elements are super important as well, and in the end, it also drives the bottom line. If you then look more to the demand side, and again going to give you a bit of statistics, every month Deloitte is surveying thousands of consumers in 22 different countries to ask them, how are you going to consume and buy in the next 4 weeks? So it's forward-looking. And of all of those consumers, they say, there are many attributes, that drive a sustainable choice. And 55% is around net zero, but 38% is around, social procurement and, producing in a social conscious way. And I think that is a statistic that is super important. If you also look to the consumers, is that near to 50% of consumers are saying, I am going to buy sustainable, and I'm willing to buy sustainable. And out of those 50%, 40% of the consumers are saying, and I even want to buy a premium for it, of up to 25%. So there is a business case, and numbers and money talks. And if you then look to who is making the procurement decisions in households, that's 80% of the time women. And of the day-to-day shopping, it's 91%, of the time women. So, I believe there, we can unlock so much more around diversifying the supply chain, being more gender conscious about the decisions that we make, because there is a business case behind it. And I think we should change that paradigm. And that is the conversations that we have with clients. And look to everything around sustainability, whether it's the E, the S, or the G, more as an opportunity instead of a threat. Not look only, that you should be compliant with many regulations that are in place, but also look to the business case and that opportunity.
And for some of you, thank you so much. For some of you who were here in the beginning of morning, in the morning with Mary Forbes, we spoke about, there's a little bit of history. The goals came out around 2019, 2020. The CEO gave the big commitment. Then there was a lot of focus on how do we now then do reporting, because we don't have access to the data. Now we could do reporting, and it was very much about how do we report emission 1, 2, and 3. For around, I would say, half a year, 1 year ago, the supply chain have always been important, but this is literally, I could say, I think most of the work that Deloitte is doing right now is really supply chain. The supply chain is becoming very, very, very important. Just not this about me, but I just want to say I recently joined, I'm an advisor at EQT, where I'm part of advising how to identify software solutions in the sustainable fields. And there I joined the board of Integrity Next, and that is all about watching the supply chain. It's all about reporting the supply chain. And I can only say now with this CSRD that is coming out beginning of the year, the regulations will be really driving this here big time going forward. So if you haven't begun to work with supply chain, think about your supply chain. I would say 2024, the supply chain is probably going to be the thing you speak about. It's not about can I do my reporting. It's going to be how can I trace my supply chain. So that's going to be key. So we do one more round here. So, Cameron, you do not historically come from a supply chain background, your family, right? Or maybe. When did you decide, and because when you get to know Cameron, he's like the real thing, So he's like, he also lived the real thing in it. So when did that, or was it always like that?
Thanks, Anne. That's really, really lovely words. I guess, in a way, I did come from a supply chain background because my father founded Mulberry, so I grew up effectively de facto living and breathing the local artisan supply chains. I knew the cutters and the stitchers in the Mulberry factories because they were within half an hour's drive of our family home. So I would go and play. I used to play the trumpet as a kid. I would go and play Christmas carols on the trumpet in the factory every Christmas. I knew them all. They were like extended family. So for me, actually, supply chain has always been very literally close to home. But when I was 19 and I went and spent 9 months living in the mountains in Uganda, teaching health education at a time when the HIV/AIDS pandemic was killing over 8,000 young people a day of HIV/AIDS infection, I wanted to see how fashion could become an economic driver of positive impact in hard-hit communities, both to create economic opportunity and to enable us to raise money for health education, preventative health education programs. So for me, it was a case of actually really reaching back to what I always knew. And what I always knew was about respecting and supporting people in your supply chain because they are an extended part of your family. They are the lifeblood of your organization. You are one. You are nothing without them. When I think of any of the work that I do, when I think of the only bosses that I have and that I report to, as far as I'm concerned, are the women and the artisans in our supply chains globally. Like they are they're the people that I stand for. They're the people that I get out of bed for, and I represent them. You know, and I hope it goes both ways. You know, so I think, but it comes from growing up and understanding that we're all part of the same team, part of the same family, and I think that's fundamentally the approach that we need to take to fix the most complex challenges that we face today.
Okay, Cameron, you just set the bar. Okay, Iris, who do you work for? Who do you work for? You just heard who he worked for. Who do you work for?
I work for people and hearts, and I think you said it so nicely. I don't even know, what I can add on. I think we have to think in a connected way. I loved also what you said. A supply chain is a value chain. It means we need to bring value to the people who touch the supply chain. And if I think about jewelry, and if I think about the beautiful brands that we work with, it is a very emotional purchase. I always say, we're not talking here about buying a washing machine. We're buying here about a piece of jewelry that you will buy because you want to buy it for yourself, to empower yourself. You want to buy it for a loved one, an engagement, whatever it is. So it has a high emotional currency, and with that is a very big responsibility. So I'm fully aligned with you. It's about people and impact. I think what I want to add on it is that we need to see now that we actually have proof points. I think when we hear about the COP28, what's happening today, it's all about accountability and credibility. Everyone has made pledges. Yes, I'm committing to this, I'm committing to that. No, where are the proof points? Where are the data that you are actually changing those lives of those women and men and their families and their children in the infrastructure that you have developed by giving decent wages, by giving a safe space to work, to grow, to be educated. And I think that's an enormous responsibility. And as a final comment, Anne, you talked about the legislation. Never ever I've seen in the 25 years that I've been working in this field how legislation is being pushed. And some people, and when you look about, the European Green Deal, it has such a huge effect on the supply chain. And for the first time, companies have to do a double materiality assessment. It means it's not just about your risk, it's not just about the topics that are relevant and material to your business. It's what are you doing? What is your impact on society? And how are you going to measure that? So I think, I'm quite confident, companies that don't have their act together, they'll be out. And I think that's probably, looking at what you're saying about the Deloitte consumer surveys, what we see is that our consumer, the millennials and the Gen Z, are actually more than ever looking for purpose. They're activists. They don't want the blah, blah. They want the proof points of companies. And I think that's encouraging also for us as an initiative to be able to showcase that we are on a journey. Is it a perfect journey? No. But it's really my personal mission in life to showcase that we as a jewelry industry, we can do good. And I do feel very privileged to be working with these brands. And, I do need to acknowledge the CEOs behind it because it's those leaders who actually make the commitments and make it happen. So again, thank you for allowing us to be here and to share our vision. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you so much. So, Anas, there's no doubt about it. You started for a couple of years ago this amazing company called Denominator, and and I know it was not easy in the beginning, but you are now seeing the push, because the issue is that all the data that you're providing is what we want to see according to the regulations. So if you should say a couple of words, and also just to guide people, because many of the data that you work with is not just data that they maybe can find the existing processes and so on. So how do you get started? How do you work with this?
Yeah, no, and I think, of course, legislation is important, but I think, also to what you mentioned, and just now with the next gen of investors, right? The consumers of the future, they care, and this is where we can take all the regulations aside. The companies that do this well will win. But yeah, there are many companies that are struggling getting started, which you also alluded to. Where do you host this data? Do you even collect it? And again, and I think many procurement and supply chain operations were set up as risk operations, meaning that they were doing first for the financial risk, just so that they couldn't get the goods, so they could produce their own goods. Then you had sanctions risk, then you had cyber risk, but everything was risk generated, and no one really thought about the purchasing opportunities from the new consumers, and this is where a lot of this data comes in. But yeah, effectively, the good news is that this type of data is starting to become available broadly, And it's not as hard because most companies already have the systems in place where they're able to see, what is our spend from a credit risk perspective, or what is our spend from an emission perspective, or cyber risk, and they have those in categories. It's just adding another category to that. I would just say that in general, legislation or no legislation, the future consumers are driving this, and the data is here now, and the big organizations are realizing it and acting on it.
Thank you so much. So I would love to hear around at MasterCard, you are a thought leader, you are here at COP. When you're a thought leader in something, you're also accountable to keep on being a thought leader. That means that, a lot of companies are doing amazing things now. So how do you kind of take it to the next level? I mean, that's the accountability in it, which is, as you said, is also day. So what are you doing now? What is the next thing?
The first thing that drives us at MasterCard is actually our customers. And we have two sets. We have our consumers, which is all of us guys in the room when you use your card and how it's driving. You're absolutely right about the youth and the next generation. They're influencing what we can do. And then we have another arm, which is our B2B world, which is working directly with our corporates. So when we look at our next gen, we're looking at how do we actually bring the two together. And the first example is just that simple thing about a carbon calculator. Now, in the corporate world, I think all of you took flights, whoever traveled here. Do you know how much your actual carbon emissions was, yeah? We've come to COP28. We'd like to make that as part and parcel of every corporate's T&E policy, that you actually have that. So you as an organization know how much your employees are actually traveling and what they're doing. So that's already started in place as I speak. A formal announcement will be made on Wednesday with Abu Dhabi Commercial Bank. They're the first to go live in this region. Really proud of it. It's a local bank doing that and says volumes about MasterCard's reach. So it's not just about what's happening in Europe, what's happening in the US. It's what's happening here in this market, what's happening in Asia Pacific. The second big thing that we're doing at MasterCard, which I encourage actively, is our employees. So we have actually 5 days of volunteering work we do. We have sustainability goals we have. We're encouraging and this is on MasterCard time, by the way, 5 days to go out and make a difference. How can you make it? So I'll give you an example. Supply chain, earthquake that happened in Turkey and the aftermath in Syria, a lot of potentially political situations. MasterCard said, we're going to get a tanker out there. How do we work with the Red Cross? Make it happen. Look at the supply chain, and we all got together. I loved your example, Cameron. We're a family. How do we actually address a real need? So just give you 2 different examples from a commercial perspective, and then obviously from what we do is what I call the moral and social part of MasterCard. But I'd like to add one more thing, Anne. We talk a lot about can we make companies and organizations more accountable? Don't forget, most companies are driven by their bottom line. It's their profits. You may have a consumer who say, I'm willing to pay a premium, but a corporate has to buy that. So unless we actually change their mindset, it won't come down the food chain. So, yeah. So for me, I work in the B2B world at MasterCard. It's something I work with my fintechs, my FIs, partners like Denominator. What do we do and how do we influence? MasterCard is in a really unique position. We're in the middle of this ecosystem. So unless we change behaviors, you're not going to see it filter down.
Thank you so much. Wow. Okay, now this is a question I wanted to ask since you're new at Deloitte on this panel here. My question goes follow. You touch so many companies around the world. Can you give, I'm not going to make you accountable for this reply, I just wanted an indication. Can you give an indication of what is the percentage of your clients today when they engage with you that it is a must, whatever service you do, that it is done with sustainability in mind?
It's a very good question. I don't have the exact numbers available, but I think that if you really look to transformations, you can always simplify it into 4 different steps. In make it visible, so measure, make it urgent, get it addressed to executives, make it happen, do the stuff, and make it stick. That are actually the 4 phases of transformations. And I think that most of the companies are in, make it visible. Then there are some companies, but I think that's less than 50%, where they really have addressed the make it urgent. The make it happen, that are, I think I can claim below 10%. So I believe that the big transformation is coming, is still ahead of us. But it's good that companies start with it. The awareness is changing. And another statistic out of the Deloitte research, which I think is also an interesting one, is that most of the change in companies are not coming from that supplier or from that consumer, but it's coming from the talent within. So 52% of new talent is making a choice for, I would say, a employer that has sustainability really front and center. Otherwise, they don't want to work for that company. So that is a big movement, and that's going, back to you, is that the new generation is making totally different decisions. So I am optimistic. You can be very pessimistic of saying, it's not happening enough. But I see some change, which is positive change, that will drive behavior. And if you want to rewire the system, you have to rewire, I would say, behaviors of people. And that's, I would say, building on what you said as a last phrase. I had more or less the same last phrase in you.
Anne, I just wanted to add a comment, and so aligned we are. I think I love what you say about it's not about making it happen. And in my view, I think the CEOs can make it happen through this cultural transformation so that everybody starts breathing it, and feeling it and doing it. And that needs, I think CEOs have to become ambassadors of sustainability. And sometimes, please don't kill me for sustainability experts, but I don't think you should have the name of a sustainability manager. It should be a chief transformation officer at C-level, having the power and the authority and the budgets to make it happen, and the finance. Because as long as it is somewhere reporting to some kind of subsection of an organization, I don't believe that it can really push the transformation that is so needed. And so this is also a call for action.
and maybe to make an analogy to 20 years ago, when we started with the digital era, you had a lot of functions that were very much focused on digital. Now everything that we do is digital, and my prediction is that sustainability officers is something of the now, but not something of the future, because in the future it will be integrated in everything we do, like digital is today.
Thank you. Let that be the closing word. Thank you so much. Thank you.